The gospel story for this Sunday, Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 to 43, deals with enemies and retaliation in Jesus' Middle Eastern culture. Experts describe circum-Mediterranean and Middle Eastern societies as being agonistic, meaning hostile and conflict-driven. Jesus' opening parable illustrates this cultural reality. An enemy sows weeds among the wheat. Now, Jesus doesn't explain this, and he didn't need to. His agrarian, peasant, agonistic audience understood him perfectly. When you were born into an ancient Israelite family, you didn't just inherit their honor status. You also inherited their enemies. Every peasant family had enemies, and knew this. Many reasons caused enmity between Mediterranean families. The consequences were always the same. Feuding persists seemingly forever. And everyone has to be on their guard. Everyone must suspect that a feuding enemy is always scheming and acting to shame, dishonor their family. In the first parable, an enemy plants shame when the wheat is sown. Honor and shame are public realities. Everything in Jesus' world revolved around these values. They were the most important thing. Once the weeds had matured, they are easily distinguishable by the whole Galilean village. The result? The family planting the wheat becomes the laughingstock of the village. Shame, or dishonor, a condition worse than death for Jesus and his audience, results. Now everyone expects violent retaliation and revenge. But the landowner instructs his slaves to allow the weeds to keep growing with the wheat until harvest time. This causes the laughter of the village at this spectacle of shame to increase 10 times. Remember, there were no streaming services or movies in this world. Feuds and other happenings provided the entertainment. Despite appearing as a fool, the landowner is actually shrewd and savvy. An experienced peasant farmer, he knows the wheat can tolerate the competition with the weeds. So, come the harvest, not only does he have grain for his barns, but the weeds provide unanticipated fuel for his other needs. Now his enemy is shamed because his strategy failed. It blew up in his face. All of this is witnessed by the village through the gossip network. The landowner and his family enjoy the last laugh. Now, Jesus was not teaching his peasant audience about agriculture, and they recognized this. This parable was instead a lesson about the cultural values of honor and shame. Even though everyone knew the landowner was culturally obligated to take revenge for his lost or besmirched honor, instead, he refuses to retaliate. He refused to get even with the enemy family. Remember, the Mediterranean societies of peasant Jesus and that of the elite author we name Matthew were both agonistic, dedicated to revenge. The landowner's victory was therefore a shocking and powerful lesson to any Mediterranean audience, whether peasant villages or urban elites. As with the parable of the sower, the anonymous author we call Matthew provides an interpretation for the in-group, his own Matthean community, his own Jesus group. The author we call Matthew and his community lived generations after Jesus and his time. And he was an elite, not a peasant farmer. Matthew and his community likely lived in a polis or urban center, not a peasant village. Like the other evangelists, all of them were elites who could read and write. There were many things in Jesus' peasant context that Matthew simply could not understand. So, like the other evangelists, Matthew changes Jesus' parables. He reshaped them into allegories. Allegorization was inevitable because later Jesus groups no longer shared Jesus' peasant worldview or experience. Do city folk today appreciate the fine points of farming? Or the pain experienced by migrants? While the Jesus of history never told allegories, the Matthean Jesus sure does. The explanation given does not follow the scenario Jesus presented in his parable story. Instead, now every item in the story is given a different meaning. Did Jesus mean that the weeds are evildoers and the wheat are the children of God? That wasn't what Jesus said. That's Matthew putting in his 2 bits worth. But even with this allegorization, the explanation still shares the common Mediterranean cultural convictions Jesus and his original peasant audience also knew, especially the overwhelming awareness by the majority of people everywhere at that time and cultural world that they had no control over their lives. Both great and lowly Mediterraneans in the first century believed that they were at the mercy of otherworldly powers, God, the evil one, and the angels. For all Mediterraneans of the ancient world, it was an everyday experience that the righteous often suffered and the wicked often prospered. The consolation for the righteous in these allegorically interpreted verses is that in the long run, God is going to get the wicked. They're going to get theirs. This idea eventually evolved into the belief in hell. The righteous will be turned into stars and shine like the sun in the kingdom of their patron. Modern Christian believers reading this might find this tit-for-tat final justice amusing. But you know what? If you reflect on it, don't you have to admit that for all our sophistication, we don't really have a much better solution for the wickedness we see in our midst, do we? Even capital punishment and accusing world leaders of human rights violations and war crimes don't seem to be much of a deterrent. And so we face the same frustration as did our ancestors in the faith. So, what can we 21st century Western Christians take from this story and its allegorized explanation then? Maybe we should look at the confidence of the landowner. This man trusts that his wheat will survive the effect of the weeds. That's worth pondering. A trust in goodness that is greater than the fear of wickedness? Wow, that could be a powerful weapon against rampant, senseless violence in our world. It has worked before in history, and it could work again if only we gave it a chance.